Have you ever thought about making your own podcast? Is there something that the podcast world is just missing that you want to put in it? Well, do what I did and download Anchor. If you haven't heard of it, it is the easiest way to make a podcast. Let me explain. It's totally free. There's creation tools that allow you to record and edit your podcast right from your phone or your computer. Anchor will distribute your podcast for you, so it can be heard on Spotify, Apple Podcast, and many more. You can make money from your podcast with no minimum listenership. It's everything you need to make a podcast, and it's all in one place. Download the free Anchor app or go to anchor.fm to get started. Hello, and welcome to episode 2 of Apparitions and Alibis. I am your host, AJ Stallman. Y'all, let me tell you, editing, absolutely no joke. It whooped my tushy. But I keep telling myself I am but the baby podcast still, and I have much to learn. I am excited for this journey, and I hope you are willing to stick it out with me as I figure this shit out. So since the first episode was true crime, I figured to balance it all out, this episode will be a spookster. Today, we'll be focusing on America's very first mental hospital, the Eastern State Hospital, now known as the Public Hospital, which is said to be haunted. I have my coffee, I have my dogs, I have my banana bread. Let's do this. Warning, this episode does talk about maltreatment of mentally ill patients and what they had to endure. There are some gruesome details. The Eastern State Hospital was first built in Williamsburg, Virginia in 1773. It had 24 rooms, many of which were unused for a couple of years. As in the case of many older institutions, the hospital was but only so worried about the healing and helping of its patients. Unfortunately, it was more of a place to hide the patients away from normal members of society. The history of this building is filled with human rights violations and horrible mistreatment. During the 18th and 19th centuries, sanity was not determined by medical professionals, but instead through legal trial, which I had absolutely no idea about. I never really even thought to think about it, honestly. But they would have roughly 12 citizens do a trial about this person, and they would deem if they were sane or not. In the mid-1700s, Francis Fakir, the governor of Virginia at the time, thought of the idea to have a hospital to house, in his words, a poor, unhappy set of people who are deprived of their senses and wander about the country, terrifying the rest of their fellow creatures. That's rough. In 1773, the same year of the Boston Tea Party, the Eastern State Hospital first opens its doors, admitting America's first mental patient. Now, earlier I stated there were 24 rooms in the hospital, but I might have fibbed to you. The rooms were more like jail cells. Each had barred windows and reinforced doors. Inside of the cells would be a chamber pot, a straw-filled mattress, and shackles made of iron that were attached to the walls. The hospital has since been turned into a museum where they house some of the devices that used to help heal the mentally unstable. One item that is on display is the Tranquilizer Chair. Dr. Benjamin Rush believed that the patient's illnesses were because of inflammation of the brain, which we all know today is incorrect. Dr. Rush created this horrid chair with the thought that having the patients feel fear was the best way to bring on sanity. Fun fact, he is now considered the father of American psychiatry and was also a signer of the Declaration of Independence. According to Rush, terror acts powerfully upon the body through the medium of the mind and should be employed in the cure of madness. He designed the chair to not only restrain the patients, but to also deprive them of sight and slow blood flow to their brains. The chair also had a large hole in the seat where underneath a bucket would be placed. I'm sure you know where I'm going with this. Basically, while blinded and having their head squeezed, they were also giving laxative injections. The theory to this is that it would release any impurities in the body. The patients of this hospital were also made to wear straitjackets, stayed chained, and stuck in solitude. And they even had to lay in coffin-like Utica cribs, stacked on top of one of another. I had to look up what this was, and I put a photo up on our Instagram, but it really looks like a wooden crib for an adult that has a barred lid on it. So imagine dog kennels with dogs in them, just stacked on top of one another. If a patient gets sick and it goes down the side, the person under is probably getting some of the vomit action in their Utica crib as well. In 1799, 2 dungeon-type cells were created beneath the first floor of the hospital for patients who were more unruly, or, in the older terms, prone to raving frenzies. 18th century's beliefs claimed that mental instability was a chosen state. With this, electric shocks or bleeding were perceived cures for unsound minds. Substances were also given to evacuate patients' digestive tracts, and lancers and scarificators were used to bleed out harmful fluids. Patients would also be submerged into ice-cold water in attempts to snap them out of their state. They called them surprise baths. When the hospital was first built, it had a large yard where patients were able to enjoy the sun and get some fresh air. Unfortunately, it was torn down for, quote, the staff's convenience. This angers me. Take the time to learn how to care for the patients when they are free from their shackles instead of depending on the ease of lock and key. You know what I mean? It wasn't until 1790 that 2 yards were added. They featured enormous 10-foot high fences, and these outdoor areas were called mad yards. The hospital commonly used unmarked graves for when a patient passed away. This was common for many hospitals of this era. However, at the Eastern State Hospital, there are 4 granite slabs with names etched onto them. There is also a 5th slab that simply has a memorial that reads, "We erect this monument in memory of those persons whom we have known, loved, and served through the years. While living, they have known suffering of inner pain, confusion, and despair. Now they are at peace in the hands of God, where no torment will ever touch them again." There is no doubt that the hospital had horrible treatment and conditions, but it wasn't always that way. In 1841, Dr. John Minson Galt was elected as superintendent, and he longed for more humane treatments. Over the course of 21 years, Galt reduced treatments employed by the hospital and replaced them with morale management. This method was very successful, so much so that the restraints were barely used, and the patients were much happier and granted more freedom. The morale management emphasized on self-control, work therapy, and going to the library. They often had other activities, such as workshops for sewing, carpentry, and shoemaking. They even had field trips to neighboring towns to see lectures and concerts. The hospital doctors were not a fan of his methods and fought him constantly. In 1862, the Civil War swept through Williamsburg, and Union soldiers took control of the hospital. Galt was not able to help any of his patients, and he fell into a deep depression and eventually completed suicide. When Dr. Galt took his life, he used the medication to overdose. This medication caused the veins in his brains to swell. When he was found, blood had puddled everywhere. After his death, a family with the last name Lee moved into the home. It is said the wife claimed that even though she scrubbed the floors where he passed, the stain of his blood would not go away. She even said they put down new flooring, and still the blood of Dr. Galt seeped through. The Lee children also had strange experiences in the home. They would often frantically wake up their mother, claiming that there was a man in their room. Poor kids. Like, you're making them sleep where the guy bled on the floor. It's messed up. The children slept where John Galt died. Was it him in their room as they slept? There are claims that his ghost still walks the halls, seeking patients under his care. Those who work at the Now Museum say some tourists report feeling sudden, unexplained gusts of wind coming down the corridors during their visit. Some employees claim that they open rooms in the morning and see beds slept in and items missing. There are also reports of muffled voices and knocking on the walls. This usually happens in the evenings and on weekends. On one occasion, a maintenance worker claimed to have seen a shadow of a wheelchair. In the institution's early days, a patient escaped the hospital and ran to the nearby palace of the Virginia governor. It is said he intended to slay the governor in the palace's hedge maze. His plot was foiled before he could carry out the action. Those who visit the palace claim to see the patient still roaming around for his target. In 2003, a group of students from the College of William and Mary fulfilled an infamous school tradition where they climb over the hedge maze. Inside, the group witnessed a pair of ghostly white feet that crept closer when their flashlight beam hit it. The students ran in terror. Besides the patient's cruel mistreatment, the building also went through some shit. The Eastern State Hospital caught fire 3 separate times. Once in 1876, which destroyed the chapel, kitchen, storage areas, and other rooms. In 1885, it set fire again. The closest volunteer fire department was 50 miles away. This was the hospital's largest fire that took out 5 other buildings, as well as possibly 2 patients. With the fire department so far away, all they could do was watch the building crumble. The last fire occurred in 1902 and wiped out a single building that was originally erected in 1844. All of the buildings were eventually replaced with much more space between them. In the 1930s, the hospital moved to a new location, though for historic reasons, the original buildings were preserved. Hello, Myrrh Lynn. The old grounds were reopened as the museum that stands today. So, if you are ever in the Williamsburg, Virginia area, be certain to pop by the public hospital. According to their website, booking a tour is the best way to go. The museum will have much more information to offer, as well as other objects not discussed in this episode. I searched around a little and saw they even have Dr. John Galt's notebook with patient symptoms and time of day for medication. It's very interesting. I hope you enjoyed this historical haunted place. Make sure you follow us on Instagram at Apparitions and Alibis to keep up with future episodes. Thank you for listening. Have an amazing night, day, afternoon, whatever time it is where you are. Can't wait to talk to you again. Peace out.